Hey, what's up guys? So in today's video I want to talk to you about what's probably been the most useful and impactful thing that I have done so far in regards to the improvement of my Spanish level, which is of course reading. So I want to just say before I get into the video that I never had any interest in reading fiction before I started learning Spanish, but now I actually find myself reading almost every day, and in fact not too long ago I set myself a little challenge of trying to read 12 Spanish books in 12 weeks, which not only was super beneficial to my Spanish learning but was also really fun and interesting. So in today's video, as a few people have asked me about it already, I want to talk a little bit about how and why you should start reading in Spanish and share with you guys a few of my recommendations for books to get started with and a little bit about my experience and some of my tips for effectively reading in a foreign language. Okay, so let's start with the why. Why should we bother reading in another language? So the first reason I think it's really beneficial to read in a foreign language is because books give us exposure to a huge amount of vocabulary, a lot more than we would generally be exposed to in a TV series or a film, for example. Think about it this way. When you watch an episode of a series, a lot of the information is shown to you. You see the scene, you see the weather, you see the clothes the people are wearing, you see the facial expressions, and so words aren't needed to express those things. But in a book, the author has to use words, has to use vocabulary to communicate all of these different things. So you get an exposure to a much bigger amount of words and vocabulary than you would if you were watching the equivalent story in a series or a film, for example. The second reason I think reading is very beneficial for language learning, and sticking with this comparison of series versus books, is that reading forces you, or lets you, create your own image of what's happening in your mind. So again, similarly to what I said in the previous point, in a series, all of that information is shown to you. So when a character is introduced, you see the character, and that's what the character looks like. But when you're reading a book and you read about a character, your brain is creating its own kind of image, and I think that connection, that relationship to the words, to the vocabulary, to the characters is a lot stronger in a book a lot of the times. And as it relates to language learning, again, you get a lot more of a high quality relationship with that information. It's not just a word in a translation, you have an image of what that word actually represents. And so finally, reading gives us the opportunity to assimilate and absorb the language in a much more natural and enjoyable way. Obviously, as you're reading, you're going to get lots of exposure to lots of vocabulary, lots of grammar structures. You're going to see all of these things in context, and it's going to allow you to assimilate this information in a more natural and enjoyable way, rather than having to go through conjugation charts and memorizing genders of nouns and all these different kind of stuff that's not going to be as enjoyable. You get to see all of those things as they are used in normal life, let's say, in a more interesting context. Okay, so now I've said my piece about why I think reading is beneficial and useful for language learning. Let's talk a little bit more about how. So I want to share with you guys a few of the tips that I think will make your reading experience a lot more beneficial and a lot more enjoyable. Okay, so the first tip is something that I've said on this channel before, and I will say again in the future because it will always bear repeating. Don't try and understand everything, just follow the main plot. So it can obviously be very tempting to want to look up every single unknown word, every word that you've never seen or come across before, but ultimately this is going to slow down your experience with reading a lot, and it's going to make it a lot less enjoyable. You're not going to be able to get into the story as much, you're just going to be flicking between book and dictionary. So follow the main plot and try and understand the rest through context, and you'll be surprised at how much of the extra details you'll actually be able to pick up just through the context of the story. Okay, so the second tip is to only look up words once you've finished reading. So once you've finished a chapter or a couple of chapters, a section, however you're working through the book, then use that opportunity to go back to the beginning of that chapter and look up all the words that you didn't recognize or the structures that you didn't recognize. But I would advise following the following tip before you do that. So the next tip is to try and guess the meaning of the word through the context before translating them. So sometimes this is going to be a lot easier than others, but you'll be surprised at how quickly and how much this skill will improve as your language learning skills improve. The more that you understand about a language, the more that you're going to understand about the different roles that certain words will play, the different endings that different word types have, and all of these different things. And all of that information is going to help you to better guess maybe generally what this word is going to mean before you actually look it up and search for it. And the reason I think this is important is that words that are understood and remembered through natural context, through understanding the general idea and the meaning of that word, having an image of what it represents rather than just a word-for-word translation, is always going to be a lot more effective. You're going to remember that stuff a lot more, and again, you're going to have more of an emotional connection to that information, to that vocabulary. Okay, so the next tip is to prioritize interest when you're choosing books. So picking up a book in any foreign language is always going to be a bit of a challenge, and of course you're going to want to be conscious of your level and not pick out something that is just pretty much impossible for you. But I've always found that an interesting, difficult book is a lot more useful to me than a simple or boring, easy book. I think following your interests and finding something that you're genuinely passionate about is a really important part of this process. If you're forcing yourself to read things that you literally don't care about, it's going to be a lot harder to maintain that interest and that motivation. Okay, so to finish off, I want to talk to you a little bit about my experience starting with reading and share with you guys a few of the recommendations that I have, books that I've read that I think would be useful to get started with. So like many people, the first book that I ever read in Spanish was Ollie Richards' Short Stories in Spanish. I think this is a really great book to start with because it has a collection of very short stories, and each story fits into a slightly different genre. So you're getting the repetition of lots of basic key vocabulary, but you're also getting a little bit of variety through each different story. From there, I moved on to several more graded readers that were focused more just on one story. So the main authors or books that I was reading a lot of books by Paco Ardit. I read books like Crimen in Barcelona, Llamada Perdida, and a couple of others, and I also read some books by Juan Fernandez, which is Español con Juan, one book called Me Voy o Me Quedo, y another book called Una Chica Triste. These graded readers I think were really, really good for me because moving on from Ollie Richards' book, it was a nice introduction to something that was a little bit longer but still a short story. So instead of covering several different stories, these books were focusing just on one story. So I was then getting a lot more of that extensive exposure to the kind of key vocabulary around the themes in these books. So I would definitely recommend these two authors, these two groups of books. They've both written quite a lot of books. And so after having read probably 5 or 6 different graded readers, I found myself at a bit of a loss for what to do next. So I basically just decided to read Harry Potter, if for no other reason than loads of people talk about reading Harry Potter and recommend it as a good thing to read. I don't think there's any reason at all you should read Harry Potter, but I do think that progressing on to a sort of young adult-ish kind of story that you are already familiar with is a very good step, because what I found was that there were times where I was reading this Harry Potter book and maybe I would have got a bit lost if I didn't already know the story, but having seen the films, I could basically remember the main plot, and so I could infer what some things were and what things were happening at certain times. So I think once you start to progress past the graded readers, picking a book like that, some sort of young adult novel that you've already seen in film version, or you've read the book in English or your native language, I think that's a really good step, because that extra knowledge is a really good kind of bit of support, because yeah, Harry Potter's quite a big jump from, you know, a basic graded reader. And then honestly, once I finished reading Harry Potter, I had no idea what to go on to next, so I just went on Amazon, found a Spanish novel, bought it, and just to see what would happen. I think at some point you kind of do just have to jump in. Again, like I said earlier, you want to be conscious of your level and not try and put yourself in a position where you're going to be understanding nothing and just suffering the whole time. But I don't know how exactly you're going to measure your readiness for jumping into like normal novels. I don't know if I could tell you I was ready when I read my first novel, but I was ready for the challenge, I suppose, and I wanted something a little bit more interesting, and so yeah, I guess that was motivation enough. I don't know how you would quantify exactly when you should move from graded reader to adult novel or young adult novel to full-on novel, these different kind of things, but for me it was just a case of feeling like I wanted to engage with more interesting and engaging content, and so yeah, that was that basically. I just started reading novels, and well, here we are. So as I said earlier in the video, a few of you have asked me to make a video like this, so I hope that this video has been informative and interesting for you guys. If you have any questions about anything that I haven't covered in this video, please leave me a comment in the comment box below. As always, thank you so much to everyone that's supporting the channel. It's really awesome to see the channel growing every day, and yeah, I'm really excited to try and get some more new videos out for you guys, and yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one. Hasta luego.